Hello, I'm Celeste, and this is Week by Week. On today's episode, I start out with a conversation with my husband where we talk about some of the heavier feelings that can come up around parenting. Then later on, our guest is the absolute ray of sunshine, Danice Cabanela. Let's do this. I loved asking you a random question last episode, so I'm going to keep that going.
Yeah, I mean, keep it going from basically the beginning of our relationship where all you wanted to do was play question game all the time.
That's true. I do love asking questions, and the more vulnerable, the better, obviously.
And that meant asking me questions while I was falling asleep when we were like early in dating.
It's been established. It continues to be a pattern. And honestly, I highly recommend it. So if anybody is looking for tips to really dig deep in intimacy, get them when they're sleepy. Ask them some intimate questions. See what happens.
Oh, boy. Get them when they're sleepy. There you go.
For intimate questions.
Yes, of course.
I have a little selection of cards that I have put together. So I don't know what questions kind of come up. And we're going to dig deep on whatever we draw. So why don't you take anything from this stack, but don't peek.
Okay.
Ooh, the last time I was worried that I might be or become a bad parent.
Ooh, wow. Our son has been in and out of bouts of teething in the last month or two. Mm-hmm. And I think one of those times, maybe about a month ago, it was specifically bad for his sleep, which meant it was bad for our sleep. And I definitely had one day, towards the end of that where I was just like up with him early and exhausted, and I was just dragging and not feeling like I was maybe giving him the attention that I would want to be giving him. Not that it was like dangerous or anything, but I just didn't feel.
You weren't as on.
I wasn't as on, and I did not feel connected to him.
Yeah. And
I didn't feel like I was really there. And he's so outward facing, and he's just engaging so much, and he
loves connection.
He loves connection, and he loves to find ways to connect. Like he's on the hunt for them. The image that I'm having is I was sitting on the couch and he was kind of running all around, grabbing stuff and connecting it. And I don't think that I was necessarily reflecting back to him the same enjoyment and energy that I would have wanted to. And he was fine. But I do remember like later that day being like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to not be present with him.
So that brings up such a tricky spot, because there's the absolutely valid experience of being exhausted, of knowing that you're not always going to show up at your best. And then also have the kind of like aspirational or like even deep desire view of what you want to be as a parent. And I think that it gets incredibly tricky, because I think it's really important to know and strive to be the parent you want to be, and be able to give yourself grace for being able to say, I am exhausted. I have to take a beat to take care of myself so I can show up later on in the way that I want to show up. And out of that, there is so much opportunity for guilt to seep in.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to kind of get your response to all of that.
Yeah. I did feel a little guilty, but I think that, one of my rules in life, I give it basically 24 hours of not feeling good or just kind of like feeling my feelings in regards to anything in life. And, then it's not like now I'm working on not just like flipping a switch and be like, everything's fine.
Right. Like I can't have it seep in anymore.
No, but I still like the rule, because it's basically saying I have zero expectation of myself to be at my A game for this stretch of time. And I did apply it in that case. I remember saying like, feeling guilty and feeling like later that day, feeling like, boy, I just was not giving him what I would want to normally give him. And I was like, you know what? Okay, it happened one time. It's one day, and I'll come back tomorrow and I'll be better. But yes, I did feel guilty, but I take what you mean. Like, you know, it is that balancing act of your needs and their needs. And it's not always easy, and it's not always in balance. I think I think it's over time you want it to be in balance, you know. Any one day it won't be.
Right. Well, and it's just, I think I had a situation that was similar recently. Again, we have been so tired. Sleep got so bad for a stretch. I mean, it was like 4 teeth that came out that broke through at the same week. Like, so he was uncomfortable. We, of course, are going to change our routine so we can be there for him and support him through something that truly I can only imagine. Can you imagine teeth coming through like that? So all of that aside, when you are so tired, I felt a moment where I had a moment in the middle of the night. I mean, he was waking up every hour for a stretch, and he was just inconsolable. So I was with him and I was trying to, you know, soothe him. And I was so tired after like 5 days of this in a row. I started to feel myself getting annoyed. And then I started in the moment being like, you can't get annoyed. You can't get annoyed because he's going to feel your feelings. And then I also had that like voice come into my head of being like, you shouldn't be annoyed because poor guy's going through this. And just to speak to the guilt thing again, I was surprised because I feel like I've been pretty good about giving myself grace or giving myself the space to feel what I feel and normalize that all sorts of emotions are going to come up inside of parenthood. And it hit me hard. I was tired, so I was more vulnerable, so it hit me even harder. And I had a really hard time shaking that heavy, guilty feeling. I will say I do feel like I've been able to separate myself from the idea that I would be a bad parent or become a bad parent. Like that's a state or a definition of parenthood for me, and more like, oh, I might have a moment where I am not bringing my 100%. I might be doing something that might be not giving it my all, but I am not defined as a bad parent because of that. And I think I was just listening to something recently with Brene Brown speaking, and she was saying that that's the definition, the difference between shame and guilt. Shame is, I am this, I am bad, I am an idiot, I am the worst, or I made a bad choice. I did something that I don't feel like aligns with who I am. And being able to separate those two things, even though guilt feels awful, let's not lie about it, but it's not a defining characteristic because I know who I am as a parent. And right. I am not going to take on the persona of bad parent because that is not who I am.
Yep. I agree. We need to be the caretakers of that experience for ourselves and for each other. That so often we shouldn't feel guilt of a little blip here and there. And then if we do feel guilty, that's okay. It really shouldn't almost never, if never, go into shame.
Well, I think that's the thing for me. It's like I would say what you're saying, I'd almost flip it on its head, but say the same thing just in a different way. And that's saying like, let's expose those places that could feel shameful. Let's talk about the places that we could feel guilt, because I'm just quoting Brene Brown left and right over here. But like her whole thought on that is like, shame can't exist in the open. So it's like shame is a private turning in on yourself kind of a thing. So turning in on ourselves and suffering in this shame spiral alone, for the most part, I don't think that that's a state that any of us really need to be in.
Right.
Our guest today is Danice Cabanela. What can I say about Danice? I love her. Oh my goodness. First of all, her voice is so soothing. I'm just going to say that. And on top of that, she just has the most beautiful heart. I got so much out of this conversation. She is an actor, yoga teacher, and community organizer based here in LA. And side note, she's currently starring in Netflix's Adventure Beast, so make sure you go check her out there as well. Like I said, I really love this conversation. She has such an open heart, and I love how she thinks about the world. This was a slightly more vulnerable conversation for me. I really dive into my own experience in becoming a mom, and together her and I talk about some of the questions and unknowns and anxieties about becoming a parent, as well as some of the joy and surprises that accompany that. In this conversation, she also talked about happiness and how she thinks about it and what she does in a day to practice it. And I've been thinking a lot about that concept, and it's really affected me, and it's definitely inspired me to evaluate the practice of happiness. So, like I said, for the millionth time, I just love this conversation, and I just love her, and I can't wait to share it with you. So, let's do this. Yay! Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so happy to see you.
I am so happy to see you too. Oh my gosh, it's like warming me up. Do you mind starting off talking about where parenthood, motherhood, those topics live in your life?
Yeah. So when I was a kid, I wasn't actually one of the little girls who dreamed about their wedding, but I did dream about kids. I would like write in my notebook, my lined spiral notebook, like little names of, oh, I love Charlotte and I love this. I just have always been really connected to wanting to care for people and, teaching somebody how to make the world a better place. Then I got older, moved to LA, and was like, I don't know how I'm going to afford to have a kid in LA. But recently, and I think I told you this, Celeste, Alex, my husband, and I decided that we were going to have children someday. And it had been years since we were like, okay, we're just going to be the cool aunt and uncle who have fun and travel everywhere. But the pandemic had shown us, as it has, like, I feel like day after day in however long we're going to be here, what is really important to us and who's really important to us. And family is something that means so much to me, and intergenerational relationships mean a lot to me. Right now, I'm in a place where I feel nervous about bringing my own child into the world based on genetics, crazy, wild genetics, and we're considering adopting. I have loved your podcast since it came out. I love everything about it, and your vulnerability and your voice and the things that you share. Honestly, even the terrifying things, I'm like, tears, bleeds. I do feel like the more I know, the safer I feel, because I'm like, okay, I can mentally prepare for that if we were to actually, have actual childbirth. But yeah, so right now we're in a space where we're not sure which route we're going to go, if we're going to adopt or if we're going to have a little Danice and Alex.
In having that conversation, since you guys sort of changed your mind on what you thought that path would look like for you two as a couple, what has that conversation been like? What has been challenging about it, and what's been exciting about it?
There's so much love and there's so much tenderness, and I had changed my mind a couple of times prior the last few years. And so this past time when I was like, you know what, I do want kids. This really excites me. One challenge that did come up, Celeste, was he was like, are you sure this time? And I was like, part of me was like, yes, I'm sure. I know what I want. but at the same time, it's like, oh my God, that's a huge decision. And I know that he's always been so supportive of what I want, because it is my body, and he wants me to feel, completely ready to have a child, to carry that and to take on this new role. On the one hand, it has been surprising for him to have so much investment. He felt emotionally vulnerable and felt like he needed to ask me that. I sense it as a form of self-defense, as if he was trying to protect his expectations. And it made me really happy, actually, that when we had the conversation, he was on the same page. And God, it means so much to have. I mean, we need to be on the same page as a partnership and as people going through this for the rest of our lives. So that has been both a challenge and a surprise and also a delight. But also when we think about having our own children, it has been, there have been so many fears that I've had with my own, like the genetics in our family. And there is so much mental illness that runs in our family, including with me. I have a lot of anxiety and depression that I manage every day, every hour. But when you bring a child into this world, you don't know what you're going to get. You don't know how this baby is going to turn out. So that's been a legitimate fear where I'm like, I don't know. I have no idea. Nothing prepares you for that level of challenge.
When thinking about that, especially with the idea of fear coming up, what has helped you talk to that fear or start to unpack that fear so the fear isn't making the decision for you?
Remembering that nurture is a huge component with the development of a human being, and that, we all know nature versus nurture, blah, blah, blah. But I do have a lot of hope that nurturing a child, even if you do have, a mental illness or concern, that managing it and addressing things and talking through things in real time can make all the difference, and treatment. And that's not something that we had in our family. A lot of it was not spoken about. Mental health. Even though my mom says now that she was like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "What do you mean? We talk about mental illness a lot." And I'm like, Mom, do you? Like, I felt shamed. I felt a lot of shame about all of this. When I started meds in college, she was like, "And then you have to be on medication." And I'm like, as if I was weaker for having to be on medication. So I'm saying all this because in my growing up, I didn't have the support that I would definitely want to give my child. But also my mom had a lot of, unresolved trauma that she had never worked through. So that was a whole nother thing. But I know we would manage it in a different way.
Absolutely. And you have a community around you. It's like it's not on your shoulders to be the only one managing it. So it's like there's a proactivity from you, and then also knowing like you have people to also hold you up. And I think that's been a reminder for me sometimes where I go like, oh, I'm not fighting this by myself, or I'm not responsible for taking care of it all by myself, which I think, especially in motherhood, sometimes feels like, oh, I got to figure it out on my own because like the stakes are so high and all these, it's all on me. And so I think that reminder has been helpful for me. I'm really curious about the concept of generational trauma and how that kind of influences parenting. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. First, I actually want to go back to what you last said, because I did not realize how much I needed to hear that we have a community of people to support us. And I think also, the way that my parents have dealt with my brother and me, everything has been so insular. They have not leaned on anybody. And I really appreciate you saying that now, because I do feel a lot better.
Off of that, I think something I didn't also realize is like when you deal with serious topics as a small unit, as your family unit, sometimes then sharing that story or that experience starts to feel like a betrayal. Like something can start to come up, there's this feeling of like, is it my story to share? Or like, what does it mean about my family or how people will perceive my family? So there's this like kind of protection when it becomes this like insular, we all have to take care of it together. And I think that also can get really tricky because then we can't really talk about what's there or what's actually happening. And so that's also something, just I guess in my own experience, that I've been investigating of like, okay, now I have this kind of additional new family unit, for lack of a better term. Like, what feels comfortable with the way that we reach out? And, obviously we're going to keep some things as our own unit, but again, it goes back to this idea, which I just continue to want to reinforce, of like, we are not meant to do this alone.
No, we're not. We're not. And communication is so important. I know we hear that communication is key. It really is. First of all, my mom, my dad, my brother, my husband, we all deal with how we engage with other people who support us personally. Because my mom's a nurse. She talks to her nurse coworkers and friends. My dad doesn't really talk to anybody. And I, on the other hand, am like very clear to them that I really believe that we need to break the stigma of mental health, and we need to talk about these things, even if it feels uncomfortable. And it's not airing dirty laundry, because no one is equipped. No one is equipped. Even if you are a professional, a psychiatrist, having a child that you caretake for day after day after day is not the same thing. That takes a toll on you, and it's so much. So for me, communicating to my parents in my later years about what I need to stay afloat with my own mental health has been a game changer. I'm like,
Yeah.
because I'm so used to having conversations with them that pacify my role as a daughter, and not as me, Danice, a whole full human that has all the stuff that she goes through and wants to do the best that she can do and has her own struggles. That's been a lot.
What helped you with that? Because I think that a lot of us can feel like, well, I don't want to revert back into the role that I was, or the role that I can easily fall into in the family unit. But then it's just the kind of like velocity of like being in that really familiar family dynamic can pull you right back into old patterns or old behaviors. Did you find anything helped you in it, being able to say like, this is what I need, or this is where I am?
I journal every day, and having the awareness of what I want and what I don't want, I physically write those things out every day, like this flow of consciousness. And a lot of stuff with my family will come up, a lot of thoughts that I have. And so I'm constantly in the practice of knowing what I want, and also recognizing my behavior that I don't want to revert back to.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not able to recognize that behavior until we become aware of ourselves in all the different ways, like how I feel, what happens in my body when I deal with this situation or talk to this person. I grew up super Catholic in a Filipino family in San Antonio, Texas, and my dad was also in the former military. And so I grew up really sheltered. I couldn't sleep over at friends' house until after I was 18. And it wasn't until after I'd moved to Minneapolis to go to school, and then would make trips and visits back to San Antonio, that I had ways of speaking to my mom and my dad that were like sort of infantilized. So it was actually really obvious behavior to me later that I would shrink. I would be this person that was always yielding to my parents because they were my elders, and I respect my parents, and that's what you do in the Filipino culture. But as I got older and did a lot more self-examination, and I also studied psychology in college, which makes me no professional, just I know a couple things here and there. I was able to recognize that, okay, like we all do as we get older, our parents are humans that are beyond just being parents. And they have had an enormous amount of struggle and survival mode that they have been living on practically their whole lives, especially after coming to the States. And so practicing different points of view and empathy has helped me practice forgiveness and practice patience and understanding in a way that I couldn't before, when I was just always hurt. I was always hurt about why things didn't happen the way that it happened on TV. I've, in a way, been a caretaker my whole life for my brother, and I was his social buffer. So that's been really interesting to explore too, because there comes a point where you have played this role your whole life, and then when, hits the fan, I always feel like I need to do something. But there comes a point where you have to decide that you have to live your life for you and make sure you know what your boundaries are, and remember that someone has to want to help themselves. You can't make anyone do that for them.
It also strikes me too, the feeling of like, okay, so I've always been the caretaker. And so if I decide I'm going to change that narrative or tell a different story about myself, and I'm not going to fill that role, in a moment of need, then like, what does that mean about me? Like, who am I outside of that role? And like, I think that's just such an interesting thing to investigate in yourself too, because I've been really interested recently just in the stories that we tell about ourselves and how that just totally creates our reality, and what it does to say like, okay, I have been this, but like, what am I now? And like, what do I want to be? And I just am very interested in the power you have to be able to say like, no, I'm not this anymore, or like, I'm not that, and that's okay, and this can fall away for me from now. With this idea of caretaker, for both practical reasons and then societally, the expectations of a mother to be this profound caretaker is huge. And so I think sometimes I had a moment where before I got pregnant, I had started thinking about who I was and what I've been doing and how I act to people and all that kind of stuff. And I've never really just been like a child who can lash out, or a teenager who can like make mistakes. If I become a parent, that role, it feels like it's off the table for me completely. I no longer get the chance to just like be the child, because now I'm the parent and I lose the ability to like just be the child.
Yeah.
And I also want to be like the best mother for my child, and I don't want to resent them or hold this over their heads or whatever. And for me, it was like acknowledging it, letting myself be angry about it, letting myself grieve it's like there's certain things that's like, that ship has sailed for me. So there's some acceptance there. And then I think I had the perception of like what mother was going to be. And then the actual feelings that come up as a mom are so different. Like, I couldn't prepare myself for the things that like my body and brain just did naturally. And so like, there was just like a transition for me where it was like, oh, I thought I had my perceptions about motherhood, but being a mother feels different. And I know it's sort of a cop-out, but it's like, it just is the best way I can explain it. Like, it was in my body, in my bones, in my heart, in my brain more than I ever expected. It's something I've been really fascinated about in general, is this topic of reparenting, and how you can work through certain things that you wish had been different in your childhood, or are wounds that you need to heal, by getting the opportunity to both parent your child and yourself in those moments.
Oh my God. Oh my gosh. That's
So,
beautiful.
It's pretty cool. And it's like, I think it's wise to have a team of people around you, like a therapist to talk things through, or like Dave and I have a couples therapist as well. You want to make sure you're not projecting certain things onto your children. But I have found it really healing to be able to say like, oh, I have a different type of authority, a different type of choice, a different type of care. I've been so much kinder to myself since becoming a mom, because I'm watching this little being grow, and I go like, I would never be mean to him the way I'm mean to myself. And like, again, theoretically, I always kind of knew that concept, but in practice, it just like, you feel it on this like deep level that has just cracked open this compassion for me that I just have never been able to have otherwise.
Oh my God. Wow. That just moved me to the core.
Oh,
I didn't even think of it that way. I didn't even think of like healing yourself at the same time while you're Because in my mind, I'm like, I need to fully heal and just like, I just need to like only work on me. And then someday I'll be ready to have a child.
Right.
But it doesn't work that way. And I know life is not like a zero-sum game where, you know, it's like, here's like the chips. Here's a trauma chip I'm going to remove. And how did you come to a point where you were like ready?
I think for me, my husband and I knew we wanted to have kids. We'd always be like, oh, I can't wait to meet them. I can't wait to meet them. And I had this simultaneous like excitement and then this feeling of like, I think I just am going to know someday that I'm ready. Like, I'm just going to know that I'm ready.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't. I got pregnant. And it was just like, we weren't really, quote, trying, but we weren't not trying. Like, there was just like, we were kind of just being like, well, whatever happens, happens. And I got pregnant and I was so excited and so scared and so all of these things. But even then, I don't know if I was ready. And actually the thing that like solidified in my mind the degree that I was not only ready, but deeply wanting this was I had a really, really bad bleed my first trimester.
Oh, man.
So scary. And I think that like made me go like, there's a lot of noise out here, but I am understanding now, just like on a deep level, how much this is something that I want and feels right for me and my body and my life. And so the thing inside of all of that, since there is going to be always a chance of uncertainty or questioning, is like trying to get quiet with yourself when you can, and then trying to not judge yourself for whatever comes up. And again, I'm just going to be a broken record. Knowing that you have a community and it's not only on your shoulders to figure out, to feel right about, to whatever. But if you can alleviate as much of that judgment, because you feel like you have to be all things all the time. And if you don't achieve that every day, it's easy to feel really judgmental of yourself. So I think like motherhood for me is a big practice of kindness, both for yourself and for everybody around you, but like deep acceptance of the circumstances so you can really meet them with kindness.
Beautiful. Oh, man. I'll say that I needed to hear all of that.
Aww.
It just makes me, feel like I wouldn't, ruin my life. Like by coming into this new role and not knowing what the hell I'm doing or allowing fear to take over me, but just hearing that it was in your bones and it was in your heart. That gives me a sense of like deep hope, because my brain just goes like, this is the worst possible thing, this worst kind of thing that can happen.
Right.
And I don't think about like the good things enough when it comes, I'm like risk management always, but that is so important for me to hear the community, the fact that even someone like you who like, I think we're so alike, it helps me to see someone like you and see how, there will be struggles, but you're still crushing it. Like you're still doing amazing.
Oh my God, you're so sweet. There's so much to it and there are so many unknowns. And like, I think you're very sweet in the way that you're thinking about it, because you're thinking, is this the right choice for me? But you're also thinking, is this the right choice for this person I'm bringing into the world? And that's so much weight on your shoulders. And so it is like, I think, is this a longing in you? Is this something that you long for in whatever capacity, whether it's through adoption, whether it's through having your own child? Is that a place that feels like a deep longing? And if it is, then that feels like that's probably something to pursue. And if it's not, that's also great,
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Be right back. I'm going to go have a baby. I'm going to make one.
Oh my gosh. If you guys get pregnant tonight, just like, you got to come back on the podcast.
9 months later. Wow. This is like, my brain is like, there is so much that will be journaled tonight. Let me tell you.
Well, you have been you're a yoga instructor as well as an artist. So both places that I think are really connected to emotions and presence. I'm always looking for tips and tricks that our guests can, present for balance and grounding. Is there anything recently that's been particularly healing for you, or has been something you would feel comfortable sharing as something that could be helpful for somebody else?
Oh man, God, I love, you're right. I love teaching yoga. I love being an actor. I love all these things that require being present. So I'm reading Say What You Mean. It's a book, A Mindful Approach to Nonviolent Communication. And it's a great read. One of the most important reminders that came out of this book, I'm still in the process of reading it right now, is when we are present, we allow ourselves more choice. When we are aware, we allow ourselves more choice to take action, to pause, to consider how we're feeling and how the other person's feeling, and that was really empowering to me to be reminded of, and that presence of mind and body, and allowing your body to just take a moment, take a breath, feel the air on your skin, name 5 things, or there's like a number of things.
It's like 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, probably.
Mm-hmm.
2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. That would make the most sense for me in the kind of like.
But yeah, that reminder of, okay, just, it's a tool, a tool that I remember being told years ago, but I needed to hear it again, because especially when we have so many things that we're juggling, yet we are in the same place. Like a lot of us are like, okay, I'm going to Zoom for the 700th time today. To calm our mind and bodies, it's those 5 things that we'll definitely have to put in the show notes later.
Obviously, I need to brush back up on those. I think that's so great, because also something I've been thinking about a lot with like coming back to presence is like, it's so easy to go like, oh, my mind wandered, and then like start judging yourself immediately, as opposed to just being like, oh, here we go. This is like just my opportunity to walk back through that door of like bringing myself back to presence, and like being present is acknowledging the fact that my mind wandered.
Yeah. And it's all a practice. And that's something that is a huge thing to just wrap our heads around, is that everything is a practice in life. Communication's a practice. Staying present is a practice. Happiness is a practice. I don't wake up happy. I have to do the things that like my brain is just wired for just being up all the time. and so I counter that with the things that I know bring me joy and bring me peace.
What are the things that you know bring you happiness or joy, and how do you find ways to integrate that into every day? Because it is a practice, as you're saying, it's something you have to be deliberate about.
Yeah. I mean, I think that naturally as human beings, it comes easier to us to do the things that we like to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would just notice patterns. Like I noticed, okay, why am I showing up to this yoga class for that however many times? But I always observe patterns. And so that has helped me recognize, okay, I really love this. Movement is medicine. It brings me joy. It aligns me and makes me feel human again. Journaling helps me become aware of my thoughts. And then for me, someone who's so anxious, and then my brain will just anxious climb all over the place. And then suddenly I won't know where I am, especially if I'm not being mindful. But if I'm able to think about what I journaled about, it's exercising the muscle of awareness that has helped me. But I think we naturally do the things that we love to do easier than the things that we don't. So for me, it's yoga. I like to stretch, and also I have a terrible back. So not having a terrible back brings me joy. Dancing in my living room and doing dishes brings me joy. I actually measure the amount of time I'm doing dishes by how many songs I have listened to.
That's so fun. You've mentioned communication a couple times throughout this podcast. I would love to pick your brain again on any tips you have about communicating. And it sounds in line with what you're reading, but this kind of idea of being able to say what you feel in a kind, respectful way, but in a direct way too, because I think it can be, let me say right here, I can get tripped up really easy. So I would love to hear, selfishly, and I think for anyone listening, any tips you've learned for communication.
I mean, always coming from a place of empathy always helps in communication. And of course, like there are obvious things. Like we know that someone is going to be less likely to hear us if we're blaming, if we're defensive. And so if I let's say if I'm in an argument with Alex and I say something to hurt him, like it actually takes mindfulness to pause and say, I am really trying to understand you. Can you take that back and then tell me again? You know, and when we're in the moment, especially as artists, we just like vomit emotions, sounds, and things just come out of my mouth. But reading that, like, sometimes you just have to be that blatant about what is going on in, you know, like, not necessarily in our thoughts, but it is something that we are trying to work through. If we come from a place of trying to understand, you will be much better off. Because I think a lot of people come into conversations, especially arguments, thinking that they know what the other person is going to say or do. The truth is we don't. That person doesn't know. And so, like, we got to figure it out together.
Yeah. Ooh, I like that. Getting out of just in here and being able to know you're not in this alone. You're not responsible for everything by yourself, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've been beautifully outspoken and active in your activism work. Will you tell me a little bit about what you're currently up to?
Well, one thing that I do want to say about my philosophy with taking on activism is that I see it as a necessity. It's not just like another part of my life. It is ingrained in my life. Like, if I don't work to become a more educated and active participant in my union, like SAG, what is the point if I'm working on a shitty set and like I didn't do my part to fight for it? I think that so many people separate, compartmentalize too much, which I have been so good at compartmentalizing in my life, but there's some things that we just have to come to realize that it is all connected. Global warming and just the health of the earth. I could be living my best life and being my best self and doing everything that I can to improve me and my little sphere. But if I don't have an earth to live that life on, like, what's the point? And so I see it as ingrained in my life and not separate. It's something that I'm trying to integrate more with artist life, more so, starting with APA Artists for Change and Filipinx Actors Barkada. But it takes so much consistency and patience.
Will you tell me quickly about both of those?
Sure. So Asian Pacific American Artists for Change, or APAC, formerly also APAAC, is an artist action group that meets regularly. We used to meet once every couple of weeks, so twice a month, but now we meet once a month. And it's a group of AAPI artists that gather and we learn together and we take action together. So that we have a document that we share that's broken off into 3 sections. It's something to learn, someone to know, and some things to do. And we try to integrate activism within the artist community, starting with my own community. You know, there happen to be more Filipinos in this group that come regularly, but you have to start somewhere. Especially the bigger goal you have to start small. You have to start 1 foot at a time. I do intend to program more community workshops that are through APAC, but that might be for the general, actors community that is hosted by us. We want to inspire people to be active on local and national levels. There's so many ways to participate as an active member of society, whether that's marching or educating yourself or having conversations that are hard to have. And then the second organization that I co-founded is Filipinx Actors Barkada. And it started out as another group that I co-founded over the pandemic. I don't know if I mentioned that for the first one, but these were both formed during this crazy time that we're in. But it's all Filipino actors that gather bi-weekly to either be in class together and work on our craft and or share resources and experiences and cultural, shared cultural experiences outside of the industry. And it's been life-changing, Celeste. Oh my gosh. It's just, when I was growing up in San Antonio, we did have like Filipino friends, like a small group of Filipino friends that we grew up with, but no one else was an artist like me. And so I always craved that kind of community that I didn't have until I moved here to LA. And we just figured it's time that we start really coming together on, we should just start coming together. That's where it started.
I love it. I love it. What do you think the role of activism is for families?
It would be a choice for people whether to take it on or to not. But I think that we live in a society now where you're forced to know more than your own sphere. And it would serve your kids, your siblings, other members of society, if you made it a habit to talk about social politics or what it was like to be in the shoes of someone else, someone who is not like you, underprivileged communities or underserved communities. It makes the world a less scary place. It makes the world a better place if we come from wanting to understand what others go through. And when you make that a practice to talk about with your family, because, a lot of family is a great place to start planting the seed for empathy. That's what I'll say.
That's beautiful. Where can people find you?
I am at Danice, spelled Danice, Cabanela, Cabanela, on all platforms, Instagram, Twitter, Clubhouse, LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn now, baby. I'm an adult.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being on here.
It's such a pleasure.
Oh, I love your heart so much, and I just love you. So thank you.
I love you too. Thank you for this space, and I just love this podcast. So I am thrilled to be on it.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Week by Week. Please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at Week by Week Podcast and visit our blog at weekbyweekpodcast.com. Check out the show notes for more information about our guests and additional resources I used and referenced during this episode. This podcast was produced during the COVID-19 pandemic and recorded remotely. Our show today was produced by me, Celeste Busa, and Dave Hill, and edited by Douglas Sarine and Colleen Beasley. Week by Week is a Gumption Pictures production.